The late afternoon light lay in narrow bars across my kitchen table, catching on the gold edges of sympathy cards that still stood where friends had left them. I was rinsing out my tea mug when the phone rang, and without thinking, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "I sold your car," Clarabelle said. No greeting, no hesitation, just those 4 words clipped and confident. I blinked at the receiver. "You what?" "I sold the Toyota. Got $9,000 for it, which is pretty good considering its age. I've already moved the money into an account I set up for you, easier to manage that way." I pressed my palm to the counter, steadying myself. "Clarabelle, I need that car. The hospital is across town. The bus route, oh Mom." She sighed, the sound heavy with condescension. "You're 75. You shouldn't be driving across Denver just to shelve books part-time. It's not safe, and honestly, it's beneath you at this stage. Let's focus on comfort, not commuting." Her voice became a faint drone in my ear as my gaze drifted toward the kitchen window. Down the driveway, a man I didn't recognize was walking toward the Toyota. Mid-40s trim, wearing a dark windbreaker despite the warmth. He moved like someone with a purpose, glancing once toward the house before opening the trunk. My breath caught as he lifted out a thick, plastic-wrapped folder and tucked it under his arm. Without a pause, he shut the trunk and crossed to a black sedan idling at the curb. The driver never looked up. The man slid into the passenger seat, the car pulled away, and they were gone. "So you can put that money towards something practical," Clarabelle was saying. "Maybe get a mobility scooter. They're much easier than who picked up the car," I asked, cutting in. "The buyer sent someone." "Don't worry about it," she replied quickly, as if that ended the matter. "It's handled." But it wasn't handled. The man who had just driven off wasn't the new owner. I could feel it in my bones. And whatever was in that sealed folder, it mattered enough for someone to come for it before I even knew the car was gone. I hung up. Soon after, my eyes still fixed on the empty driveway, the last glint of sun on the space where Henry's Toyota had stood for more than a decade. My mind was already turning to the filing cabinet in the spare room. The spare bedroom still smelled faintly of lemon polish, a scent Henry had always insisted on after dusting his filing cabinet. I knelt in front of it, tugging open the bottom drawer where the automotive folder should have been. Nothing. Not just the title, but the insurance cards, the maintenance logs, everything that belonged to the Toyota was gone. My fingers rifled through the neatly labeled tabs, home medical taxes. Each section was intact, untouched. Only automotive had vanished, as if someone had plucked it out with surgical precision. The image of the man in the driveway flashed in my mind, his hands gripping that plastic-wrapped folder. I closed my eyes, and memory pulled me backward. 30 years. Henry, standing in the driveway on a cool spring morning, a cup of coffee balanced on the hood, handing me a tire pressure gauge. "Check it here," he'd said, crouching down beside me. "You should never have to rely on someone else to tell you if your car's safe. Oil coolant tire pressure, learn these, and you won't get stranded or cheated." I'd laughed, then teasing him about turning me into his apprentice. But I learned, and he was right. Henry was always right about machines. He'd been offered promotions over the years, shop foreman, service manager, but he always refused. "That's a desk job, Izzy," he'd tell me. "I fix things. That's what I'm built for." People trust a man with grease on his hands more than a man with a tie. I pulled open the smaller top drawer, half expecting nothing but paper clips and spare keys. Instead, a scrap of lined paper caught my eye. Henry's handwriting, neat block letters, ran across it. "If loyalty is tested, look where you keep your hands warm in winter." The words sent a shiver through me. I read them twice before it clicked. The Glovebox. Henry always called it the heart of a car's history. It was where he kept duplicates of important documents tucked behind the registration. A habit from decades of working in shops where paperwork could go missing. If someone else knew about that, I stood abruptly, the note still clutched in my hand, my mind turning toward the only person who might help me find out what was inside before it disappeared for good. Margaret was already seated when I arrived, her back straight, her hands folded over a mug of black coffee. Even in retirement, she looked like she could march into a courtroom and dismantle an entire case before lunch. "You look pale," she said, as I slid into the booth across from her. What's happened? I told her everything. The call from Clarabelle, the man in the driveway, the missing folder. Her eyes narrowed with each detail, the crease between her brows deepening. "That's not just wrong, it's illegal," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Was the title in your name?" "It was," I said. "Has been for years." Henry made sure of that. Margaret leaned back, her gaze fixed on me. "Then Clarabelle had no legal right to sell it. We need to find out who bought the car before they re-register it." I stirred my tea more for something to do with my hands than for taste. "And if it's already gone, then we make sure it isn't. Give me the VIN." I recited it from memory. Henry had drilled it into me alongside birthdays and anniversaries. Margaret pulled her phone from her purse and stepped away from the table. I watched her pace slowly near the window, her lips moving as she spoke to someone on the other end. When she returned, her expression carried a glint of satisfaction. "My friend at the DMV came through. The buyer's a dentist in Boulder. The car's sitting in his garage, not yet re-registered. That means we have a window." A weight lifted from my chest, but it was quickly replaced by a heavier unease. "What about the man in the driveway?" Margaret slid into her seat, lowering her voice even further. "That's the interesting part. There's a note in the sale paperwork, special pickup arranged folder in trunk retrieved separately. And it was signed for by someone with Clarabelle's married last name." I felt my stomach drop. She arranged for someone to take it before the buyer even got the car. Which means Margaret said, tapping the table for emphasis, she knew exactly what she was looking for. I thought of Henry's cryptic note about loyalty being tested. If the folder had been in the trunk and Clarabelle sent someone for it, then she might already know more than I'd ever guessed. Margaret reached for her coat. "We need to get to Boulder before the weekend. The longer we wait, the more likely that car and whatever's still in it disappears for good." I nodded, my fingers closing around Henry's note in my pocket as we stood to leave already, picturing the drive ahead and the garage door that held the first answers. The drive to Boulder felt longer than it was my thoughts, crowding out any sense of distance. Margaret took the wheel, navigating with her usual quiet efficiency. We pulled into a quiet neighborhood where the houses stood tall and symmetrical, each lawn clipped with surgical precision. The dentist, Dr. Mercer, was already waiting in the driveway when we arrived. A tall man with kind eyes, he greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Trenwith, I'm sorry for the mix-up. If I'd known the circumstances, I never would have gone through with the purchase." Margaret stepped in, explaining the legal side, but he waved it off. "No need. The car's in the garage. I haven't even driven it." He led us around to the side, unlocking a set of double doors. There it was, Henry's Toyota, exactly as it had been the last morning I'd seen it in our driveway. My breath caught at the sight. "The keys are inside," Dr. Mercer said, pointing to the driver's seat. "I'll get the paperwork so you can take it." Margaret handled the formalities, but I barely heard them. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of worn leather and faint engine oil wrapping around me like a memory. My hand moved automatically to the glove box. It opened smoothly, revealing its neat, almost Henry-like order. The car manual tucked to one side, a fresh set of registration and insurance documents on top. Beneath them, an envelope cream-colored, heavier than standard paper. My name written in Henry's precise block letters, for Isolde, urgent if anything happens to me. My pulse quickened. I tore the seal carefully, as if the paper itself might bruise. Inside, 3 items slid into my hand, a small brass key with an embossed tag. First National Bank Broadway branch, a USB drive labeled in permanent marker WMLLC, a folded note in Henry's hand. Do not trust anyone until you've opened the box. This is bigger than you realize. The words sat in my palm like a stone, cold and heavy. I read them twice then, a third time. Henry was not a man given to drama. If he'd written this, it meant the stakes were far beyond what I'd imagined. Margaret stepped up to the open driver's side door. Everything all right? I closed my fingers around the key and the USB, slipping them into my purse. We need to go to the bank, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The Toyota's engine turned over without hesitation, the sound achingly familiar. I pulled out of Dr. Mercer's driveway, the safe deposit key pressing against the lining of my bag as we headed back toward Denver. The First National Bank looked more like a courthouse than a place to cash checks. Dark wood panels stretched up to a coffered ceiling, brass fixtures catching the muted glow of old pendant lamps. Margaret's heels clicked against the marble floor as we followed a clerk to the vault. The safe deposit room smelled faintly of metal and polish. My hands trembled as I fitted the brass key into the narrow lock. The clerk nodded, then withdrew to give us privacy. Inside the box was a stack of thick manila folders, a leather-bound journal, and an envelope bulging with documents. Margaret pulled the folders onto the small table in the corner. The first folder held property deeds, 17 residential buildings, and 3 commercial spaces, all held under the name Winter Mechanics, LLC. The name caught me. W.M., Henry's initials. I'd thought he only owned our home and the small lot where his workshop had stood. Margaret whistled softly. This is a portfolio, Izzy, and it's clean, no liens, no mortgages. This is serious wealth. I turned my attention to the leather journal, its spine worn smooth. Inside were 30 years of Henry's cramped handwriting entries about business deals, tenant stories, notes on maintenance schedules. But tucked between 2 pages near the end was a bank statement. The statement was from an account in my name. A secondary account I hadn't accessed in years. The balance, once over $200,000, now showed less than 10. I flipped through the accompanying statements. The withdrawals had begun 6 weeks before Henry's death. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Each one siphoning away the life Henry and I had built. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she scanned the numbers. This wasn't random. Someone knew exactly how to get into this account. Who had access, Henry? And me, I said slowly. The realization formed like ice in my chest. And maybe, Clarabelle. Henry had mentioned the account once years ago when we were updating our will. I'd forgotten about it, trusting it was safe. Now the trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Margaret closed the folder of deeds, her expression hardening. If she took this, she's not going to stop there. I slid the journal and the folders back into the box, locking the key in my purse alongside the USB drive. The weight of both felt heavier now, not just with value, but with the danger of being the only one left to protect them. The ascent lofts gleamed in the afternoon sun, all glass panels and sharp lines, the kind of place that advertised exclusive urban living in glossy magazines. I signed in at the front desk, giving my name without explaining why it might carry more weight than the young concierge realized. Raj Patel. The building manager appeared a few minutes later, his dark hair neatly combed, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Trenwith Clarabelle isn't home yet, but I can show you up if you'd like to wait. I followed him into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman I barely recognized, shoulders, squared gaze, steady. As we reached the 12th floor, Raj glanced at his clipboard. I should let you know your daughter has some ongoing issues here. Lease violations. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, he consulted his notes. Several noise complaints from neighbors' late-night music. Modifications to her thermostat system without authorization, and storing a bicycle in the fire stairwell, which is a safety violation. We stepped into the hallway, the faint scent of expensive candles mixing with something metallic. I kept my voice neutral. And how do you usually handle situations like that? 3 written notices, then fines, and in extreme cases, lease termination. But, well, she suggested she has connections that might make her an exception. I smiled faintly. Treat her like any tenant. No exceptions. Raj's brows lifted, but he nodded. Understood. Inside, Clarabelle's apartment was as curated as a showroom white leather sofa, glass coffee table, abstract art in shades of steel and crimson. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my fingers resting lightly on my knees. Through the tall windows, Denver's skyline glittered in the distance. I realized I was seeing her world from a new vantage point, not the child I'd raised, but a woman who believed she could bend rules without consequence. It wasn't revenge that warmed my chest. It was something quieter, steadier, the knowledge that I didn't need to raise my voice or fight her head on. I could let the natural weight of her own choices find her. Raj left with a polite nod, promising to follow up on the violations. I stayed seated, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, waiting for the sound of the front door opening. The rain had started just after sunset, a soft patter at first, now steady against the bedroom window. I sat cross-legged on the bed, Henry's leather-bound journal resting on the quilt. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the wardrobe, mingling with the cool dampness drifting in through the cracked window. I turned the pages slowly, the paper whispering under my fingers. Each entry was a map of his steady hand, dates at the top, precise lines of thought following beneath. He had chronicled every property purchase from the first duplex on South Logan to the brick-front commercial spaces near Union Station. Not just numbers, but the why behind each choice: proximity to transit, durability of materials, neighborhoods on the cusp of revival. Midway through a page stopped me cold. His handwriting slanted slightly more than usual, as if written with urgency. Wealth is not for display. It's for buying time, for living by your values. Status fades. Freedom lasts. I traced the words, feeling their quiet defiance against everything Clarabelle seemed to chase. Henry had never cared for marble countertops or imported tile. He measured worth in mornings spent without alarm clocks, in being able to close the shop early to help a neighbor. Near the end, I found his final entry. Clarabelle worries me. She mistakes appearance for value. I hope Izzy can help her see what matters before she loses more than she realizes. My throat tightened. He'd written this only weeks before his death. Below the words, a single line sat alone on the page. The tools in my workshop are worth more than any ledger they built everything. I could see him there even now, bent over the workbench, the scent of machine oil in the air, his hands moving with the ease of muscle memory. He'd taught me to change a flat tire on that same bench, to sand down wood until it was smooth as glass. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping in uneven rhythms like a clock I couldn't quite read. The thought crept in quietly, but settled with weight. Perhaps the workshop was the bridge, a place where Clarabelle could see the truth, not written in ledgers or property deeds, but in the grit and craft that had made them possible. I closed the journal gently, the echo of Henry's words still in my ears, and reached for the phone. The workshop smelled exactly as it had the last time Henry stood here, oil cedar shavings, and the faint tang of metal. Sunlight slanted in through the high windows, casting sharp lines across the workbench where his tools hung in perfect order. Clarabelle stepped inside hesitantly, her heels clicking against the concrete. "I don't know why we couldn't just meet at a cafe," she said, glancing around with mild disinterest. "Because this," I replied. "Sweeping my hand toward the walls is where everything began." She raised an eyebrow. "The tools? Yes. These tools bought your apartment building. They bought 17 other properties, 3 commercial spaces, And they kept your father and me free to live exactly as we wanted. Her laugh was quick, brittle. You're joking. I met her gaze steadily. No, Henry built a company, Winter Mechanics LLC, and put every property under it. The deeds are in my name now, including the building you live in. She blinked as if trying to sort the words into a shape she could understand. And you're telling me this because I found something else in the glove box of the car you sold without my permission. Her eyes flickered. That was, don't I said, softly. There was a sealed envelope, a safe deposit key, documents, and a note from Henry warning me not to trust anyone until I'd opened the box. The color in her cheeks deepened. You think I think you've been chasing something that isn't worth the cost. I stepped closer, picking up the leather journal from the bench and holding it out to her. This is your father's journal. 30 years of his work, his philosophy, his reasons for doing everything the way he did. She didn't take it at first, her eyes still darting around the room like she was looking for a hidden trick. Then slowly, she reached for it. I want you to read it, I said. All of it. And then we'll talk, but not before. Clarabelle's fingers tightened around the journal. Her mouth opened as if to argue, then closed again. For the first time in a long while, she was silent. The quiet between us was heavy, but not hostile. More like the pause before something begins. She turned toward the open-door journal clutched to her side and stepped out into the bright afternoon. 2 weeks later, I was on my knees in the front yard, pulling weeds from between Henry's rose bushes. The air was sharp with the scent of damp soil, the kind of clean, earthy smell he used to say meant the garden was breathing again. I'd kept it as he had no chemicals, just patience and the slow work of hands in the dirt. The mail carrier paused at the gate, passing me a small stack of envelopes. Most were bills and flyers, but one stood out ivory paper, my name written in Clarabelle's looping script. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my jeans before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Just one line written in blue ink and underlined twice. Money should purchase freedom to live by our values, not replace them with hollow status. It was Henry's handwriting from his journal. Clarabelle had copied it exactly down to the slant of his letters. There was no apology, no promises, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just the quote. A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was something. The first crack in her armor, small and fragile. But there. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my back pocket. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, their petals scattering on the soil like small drops of color. When I finished in the garden, I walked around to the workshop. The sun caught on the brass handle as I closed the door and turned the gold key Henry had left me. The lock clicked with a satisfying finality. The key was warm in my palm as if it still carried the memory of his hands. I slid it into my pocket next to Clarabelle's letter. The portfolio, the deeds, the accounts, they were mine to protect now. But they were only part of the inheritance. The real gift was Henry's values, and that was something I couldn't pass down with a signature or a bank transfer. It had to be lived one choice at a time. And now maybe Clarabelle had taken her first step toward it.